We are going to get started here with a moment of visual access. I'm Rabbi Julie Greenberg, wearing black with a warm neck warmer and my colorful embroidered kippah, and sitting at my Zoom station at home in front of a map of the world. And I see in the Zoom room two panels of people. I see about 30 participants here. And I do believe people coming in from all over the place. Some people are still connecting. I see Wendy Jordan, who I imagine is in California. Hello, Wendy. Welcome, welcome. And I see our new members, Bill and Ann. And I see friends from all over the place. We're going to start with our Torah prayer, our prayer for learning Torah together, which is like our candle lighting blessing for people who are familiar with the pathway into so much Jewish prayer. But it ends, la'asok b'divrei Torah, to immerse ourselves in the learning of Torah. So let's offer that up together. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech ha'olam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank you, source of all, for the inspiration to immerse ourselves in learning together. We're going to be talking about a very intense topic that's also close to home for these 3 sessions in our fall series. We're talking about anti-Semitism, and the book for this series that has been assigned is People Love Dead Jews. I especially want to lift up the subtitle of the book, Reports from a Haunted Present. Reports from a Haunted Present. So we all know that the history of anti-Semitism is very relevant to what's alive and moving in our world today, in the present moment, especially even in our state at this very moment in the current election season. So this is a really, really important topic, and it touches many of us very personally, and it touches our community as a whole. We're not going to be able in this one series to cover every aspect of this topic. And what I've done is I've in the course of these 3 sessions in the outreach material for it, offered you some questions for further reflection. And what I really hope is that during the course of this series, each person here reach out to somebody else. You can even do it right now if you can use the chat box as a direct messaging, exchanging contact information, to set up a buddy partner where you can delve deeper and have more time for personal sharing and just exploration. This is a huge topic. It's really important. And I hope people will get connected to each other around it. If you need any help getting connected to somebody, you could reach out to Bobby and myself, and we may be able to have some ideas to help with that. And if anyone else wants to help as a connector, is there any other volunteer who would like to help be a connector, who could get people contact information? Here, I'm just going to see if I see a hand going up in the Zoom room. What that would mean is looking at our membership list for contact information and sharing it with somebody else who wants a buddy. And I don't at the moment see another helper, but we're good to go for the moment because you can reach out to me and you can reach out to Bobby. And if you want to volunteer to help connect people, you can also do that after the fact. So because this is such an intense topic that touches very close to home, we're going to start with a grounding. And so I invite everybody just to take a deep breath. If you're able to feel your feet grounded on the floor or the earth, connecting deeply, ultimately to this earth, just take a moment to feel that feeling. Feel the energy of the earth coming up into you, drawing up into you. with each in-breath. And as you breathe out, you can feel the deepening of your own connection to the earth, your roots, going deep into this earth that is holding you. Drawing in on the in-breath, deepening your roots on the out-breath. And now take a moment, if you're able, to look at the faces in the Zoom box. I'm going to describe what I see in a minute, visual access, and just notice who you're connected with here in this room. I now see about 35 folks between 32 boxes. Sometimes there's 2 people on a screen. I see 2 whole panels of Zoom boxes. And I see people really ready to learn and to share here in at least a nationally connected group of Jewish community members and fellow travelers. So we're connected deeply to the earth, and we're connected here in this Zoom to each other. And the reason I'm narrating that right now is that we want to just open up a space for curiosity. And that only happens when we're sort of centered and calm. You know, when we're agitated and riled up, it's just a fray. And so for this particular topic, it's really important to bring our whole selves to the situation. Very important topic. Also, I want to say one more thing before we launch in. We have 3 sessions in this series about anti-Semitism. And each session has an interconnected part of the overall theme. We will be recording each of the sessions, and I really hope everybody will be here for all 3 sessions. And if you miss one, that you will have access to the recording. And that is because this is a journey. We're just going to start today, but we're journeying somewhere together in this series. I'm really excited about this series because this is so current and relevant right now. And I hope everyone will be part of the entire fall series in one way or another. I always like to start with the question, who was able to do the reading? There's no shame. Everybody's welcome, whether you were able to do it or not, but I like to do a little check. If you were able to do all the reading, let me see a hand up here. I see a bunch of hands. Okay, if you're able to do some of the reading, let me see a hand up. Some, but not all. Okay, nice. Wonderful. And everybody is welcome because each session will also stand for itself, even if you did not do the reading. So launching right in here, I'm going to share a story, and then we're going to go into breakout rooms so that everybody will have a chance to just connect personally, interpersonally, with this topic of anti-Semitism. For some of us, anti-Semitism has touched us and affected us very deeply in our childhoods, our adulthoods, now. For other people, this has not been a major issue in a personal way. And so we're going to be in breakout rooms of 4 people. Everyone's going to have a few minutes to share and a space to do a lot of listening. Then we're going to come back into the big space and just do a little report back. But I'm going to start with the story, and then I'm going to ask some questions for your breakout rooms so that when you go into them, you can divide the time equally, 3 minutes per person. Somebody can be a timer, and I will also put these questions into the chat box. I'm going to share my own story about anti-Semitism, which is that I was raised in a family, 2 Jewish parents, neither of them religious Jewishly at all. My father had grown up in New York in an entirely Jewish community where you were kind of culturally, secularly Jewish by definition, not religiously at all. They didn't belong to a synagogue. He knew nothing about religious Judaism, but everybody was Jewish. I mean, I think he never met a single person who wasn't Jewish as a kid. It was an entirely Jewish life, just ethnically Jewish. that side of the family was an immigrant family. Many, many people from the family tree were lost in the Holocaust. It's a very truncated part of the family tree. And my mother also was born of a Jewish, New York raised mother, but not raised religiously Jewish at all. So I had zero religious Jewish education as a kid. Our religion was the civil rights movement. We were very, very involved in the civil rights movement. My parents were part of the intelligentsia of Washington, D.C. My father was a journalist. My mother was a poverty program policy person. And they were, they were part of the intelligentsia of the Washington Great Society era. And we were raised with all that, nothing Jewish at all. But we had a Jewish last name, Greenberg. And so, upon occasion, we were invited to things like seders. So as a child, I did have some experience of Judaism. We went to the bar and bat mitzvahs of the more religious branch of the family in New York, who were being raised Orthodox. So they kept kosher. They had bar and bat mitzvahs. They were my beloved cousins, who I'm still very close to, especially one of them. So I had a smattering of kind of connection. And when I was 12, I avidly read The Chosen by Chaim Potok and was very intrigued and interested. But it wasn't until, as a young adult, I was with friends who were building the feminist justice movement out in California that I went to a talk at a conference on anti-Semitism. I was with my friends, so we were all activists, and we were just learning about justice issues and organizing, and there was this talk about anti-Semitism. And I knew nothing about Judaism or really anti-Semitism or anything. And this talk was given by Dr. Michael Lerner, Dr. Rabbi Michael Lerner, who has written many books, and he was the founder and editor of Tikkun magazine. And he talked about anti-Semitism on the left. And I remember this conference very well. I was 21. And it was in a redwood forest, outside in a redwood forest. And you would go to these different lectures, and he had a big crowd there. And it was all activists who were working in other justice movements, such as feminism. And he was talking about anti-Semitism on the left. And he said, if the Berrigan brothers go around and they wear a cross, it gives them credibility. If a Jewish leader wears a Magen David, the Star of David, it makes them kind of suspicious and marginal. Now, you guys probably remember the Berrigan brothers were big Catholic leaders of the anti-war peace movement. It's funny because when I talk to much younger people today, they don't know who the Berrigan brothers were. But the Berrigan brothers are the ones who became the Catonsville Nine, I believe, who spilled blood from their arms over the draft files, and they were put in prison near Baltimore for doing this. But it was a major anti-war action, nonviolent action, and they became very famous. And at the same time, Michael Lerner was on the FBI's 10 most wanted list for similar kinds of disruption of the war in Vietnam. And he was marginalized in the left because he was very out as a Jewish person. He had come up through the conservative Jewish summer camps, was quite educated as a Jewish leader. So he was talking about anti-Semitism on the left. And I turned to my friends who were my age. We were out in the streets together as buddies doing this justice work. And I said, I don't really think there's anti-Semitism. I've never seen it. I don't know what he's talking about. But if somebody said to me, there's no such thing as patriarchy and women are fine, I would want them to go investigate a little bit more. I wouldn't want to just leave it at that. So because of that, I said, I don't think there's any such thing as anti-Semitism, but I'm not going to just let it go at that. I'm going to go do my own research and see for myself what's true. So that was the inspiration. And I did go do my own research. And of course, I found out what there is to be found, which is a pretty devastating history of anti-Semitism. And from there, embracing that learning about anti-Semitism, I actually stepped more into learning about Judaism. I had known nothing about the treasures of Judaism. The door that opened for me was a door of concern over anybody being targeted, such as in anti-Semitism. And I had been very interested in college about World War II. Like, how could there be such a failure of civilization? And that was a major question of mine in those same years, because I was a college student. How could there be such a failure of Western civilization that there would be a Holocaust and a world war? And like, what went wrong? So it was through this door of concern about injustice and civilizational failure and anti-Semitism that I stepped into even learning anything about Judaism. It opened a door for me. And then I began to discover the incredible treasures of Judaism. It was enormously meaningful to me. You can see how, like, in the years right after that, I began to kind of shape my entire life's work because of that new learning. And just the idea of Jewish resilience and Jewish community and the wisdom of Jewish tradition and all the resource there was so meaningful to me. And you can see where it led me. And unto this day, that has really shaped my work. And it's almost like today I think of myself as like a rabbi for the world, even in my justice movements. Like, I work at Power Interfaith. I'm a rabbi there working in a multi-faith setting as a Jewish leader. And clearly here in this community, which I love so much, this community is so precious to me, Congregation Lev Ha'ir, Heart of the City. I think maybe this is my 22nd year, something like that. Long-term relationship, I always say, but this is my life's work. But it started with that door of stepping into being more educated about anti-Semitism. That's where it started. So now we're going to go into breakout rooms, and each person in a breakout room is going to have 3 minutes. I hope somebody in each room will time, and you will get started right away going around. So we'll take about 12 minutes in the breakout rooms. And the questions for this are, and actually, Bobby, are you able, I know you're setting up the breakout rooms, is there someone able to type these questions into the chat box just so that everybody has them before? I think I can talk and do it at the same time. It'll just take me a minute here. What is your relationship with anti-Semitism as a younger person and in terms of your concerns now? And that's basically this question. It's a time for personal sharing and personal listening, because we each have really different stories about this. What is your relationship with anti-Semitism as a younger person and in terms of your concerns now? If you don't want to share in a breakout room, that's also your option, and you'll go into one and just pass. You can be a listener. But I hope people will share, because it enriches other people's experience if you're willing to share your own 3 minutes. Then we're going to come back and raise up some of the things that people noticed. Not just retelling your own story, but what did you notice in the collective sharing of the group? What did you learn? What did you notice from your small group? So Bobby's going to open our breakout rooms. Bobby, will people need to click acceptance or no? It's going to be automatic. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Bobby, who's doing behind the scenes amazing tech support to make all this possible. Let me just say one more thing. If there are 2 people on a screen, you will count as one person in the breakout room. Bobby, if you have any capacity to make those come out with the right number of people rather than okay. So some of the screens some of these breakout rooms are actually going to have 5 people, I guess, because of some people sharing a screen. Okay, here we go.
Hi, we're all on mute, so if you can unmute yourself to talk, that would be good. And
Diane, we Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm going to remute myself because I'm trying to get something out to somebody who's canvassing for me right now. So I'm just 2 seconds. You guys could start talking. Roberta. Oh, she's gone.
We lost her.
All right, Bobby, you could start talking. I'm listening, but I have to get this.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
Sorry.
So my experience, I knew nothing about anti-Semitism, except that when we would travel certain places as a family, my father would always say, oh, we can't go there, that's restricted. It happened in Florida a lot, where some of the big hotels on Miami Beach were still restricted. This would have been probably in the late 50s or maybe early 60s. That was what I knew. And of course, I didn't understand the full significance of it, but that was my first experience with it. And because we lived in such a heavily Jewish neighborhood in East Mount Airy, I didn't experience any anti-Semitism in my life. And the people I knew, there were more Jews than non-Jews, so it was pretty easy. But then I guess in my 30s, I had an experience where I not given a job I wanted, and I was told that it was because this person would not hire any Jews. Yeah. So that's been mostly my experience. Although I did have one odd thing. I was at a meeting once with a group, and there was a speaker, and the speaker was talking about how he lived and worked in Saudi Arabia for an oil company for a long time, which is kind of irrelevant. But he talked a lot about his life, and he talked about dating someone who was Jewish. He was not. And he said in the meeting, he said, but I've dated those sisters of Abraham before.
What?
And said it in just like that. And I was appalled. And while I'm not one to make a scene in the moment, I did go up to him afterwards. And I went up to the president of the organization running the meeting. And I told them how wrong it was to allow that kind of speech or to, not comment on it. And the speaker didn't say anything, didn't respond to me. And the president of the organization's response was, oh, just lighten up, just deal with it.
Oh, Bobby.
At which point I immediately left the organization.
Absolutely.
And now that person is a member of FITSE, but I'm sure he doesn't remember I have a hair that's driving me crazy. So I just ignore him. Anyway, that's my story.
Well, Bobby, do me a favor, and just because I was in the midst of it all, tell me, was the subject explain an experience or experiences you've had where it's anti-Semitic?
So here's the question. What is your relationship with anti-Semitism as a younger person and in terms of your concerns now? So I didn't really talk about now, but.
I'm going to put my headphones on just so I can not with Karen, but
Ironic that you and I got to be our own breakout room.
I love it. You're the best. Can you hear me though?
Yeah, you sound good. Actually, it sounds clear.
But I can't promise you my Wi-Fi won't come in and out. That's my problem. So where we are, it's funny. My mom and I both had the same experience of shock and dismay when we each heard in our own lives the phrase, I Jewed someone down. And so I wonder if you ever heard that phrase from where someone said it, not realizing it's offensive.
Yeah, I've heard it. I have heard it. Not a whole lot. I'm trying to remember.
She said it to me as if it's just a thing, like it has nothing to do with Jews in her mind. It had to do, but it did.
Right.
I think I keep myself in the closet. I don't wear it. I don't advertise it. I also don't advertise that I'm gay. If I, it's not something I need to say, but I mean, I lived in a cloistered world of Jews my whole life because I'm attracted to them and others. But growing up, I was in a comfortable Jewish world. I was inculcated with the whole Zionist spiel and Camp Ramah and United Synagogue Youth and USY on Wheels, the whole shebang. Then I went to Binghamton, which was like 90% Jew. And then my workday world, I mean, in college, law school, I met Jewish people, but that became less important in my life. And
Yeah.
And then work, I always found Jews. There were always like tons of Jewish lawyers in New York in my office. And then it continued. And my boss in Philadelphia, Delaware, was deeply involved in his congregation in Wilmington, Delaware. And so, like, I don't know. I've always had it on the part of my life where I wanted to be. Joined synagogue in New York. So, anti-Semitism.
I know it's interesting because I've gone through periods of my life where I was not in Jewish settings, or I don't know how to put it. I lived in Reading, PA for a few years. And while my boss was Jewish and a couple of people in the office I worked in were Jewish, the environment and the reason that I was in Reading, which I was living with a guy who moved there and we moved together, was not Jewish at all. And I
So
always,
that's what
but I still, I mean, I have a lot of friends who aren't Jewish, but I always feel comfortable.
But here's a question, like being in that environment, didn't you feel like an outsider because of your
Absolutely.
identity? There you are.
Absolutely.
But that's it right there.
Yeah.
It's
But
about being a minority.
like a weird thing, like now in my life, while I have a lot of friends who aren't Jewish and I feel 99% comfortable with them, and in some ways I don't. Well, I don't want to go there. Okay. But I always like having Jewish things around me. I like being part of the Jewish culture in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've come back around to it.
What does your sweatshirt say and what does it mean?
Omegang is a brewery up in upstate New York near.
Oh,
We
okay.
used to go to opera. So, but it's autumn looking. So
Yeah. I'm wearing red for Red
autumn.
October.
Okay. It's hard to articulate it because I think it's so ingrained in our culture that we don't even realize how apparent it is. I think I don't ask the question, like I don't engage in the conversation about it with people to know, because I think I don't even want to know. Like I know, I deal with a lot of people in Philadelphia who are Black.
Yeah.
And I find that it's just more like they don't know any Jews. So it's like the unknown. And I'm not necessarily needing to be the one that educates.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah,
but it's everywhere, Bobby. There is anti-Semitism, meaning you are a perpetuation of tropes and or concepts that
I see it with
people don't even realize they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I see it, and I can't prove this is anti-Semitic, but it feels anti-Semitic. One of the women that I work closely with at FITSE, she's a volunteer. And every time, and I've done a lot of Jewish things. I mean, I did a whole year of Jewish holiday programs for FITSE just because I wanted to. That was a volunteer thing. But every time she mentions something about something Jewish, she has an edge in her voice. And she'll say, oh, well, you're doing those Jewish things. And I mean, this is a Quaker, a highly intelligent woman. And I'm sure she doesn't realize she's doing it, but she is. And it's hurtful. And it not only is it hurtful, it's disrespectful and
ignorant.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, you made me think of something else. I think what I would say has come another side of the coin of what I described for myself, which is to not talk about it, is for lack of a word, self-loathing. Like I put out I almost resonate with the negatives in order to protect myself from being a victim of receiving a negative. Like I get ahead of the curve by almost adopting the negatives so that I don't have to be identified with the negatives by taking on the same prejudices.
I'm the same way. I'm very, very.
Hi, Myrna.
Hi, is it just 3 people?
Yes,
Yeah.
dear.
No, you're in a breakout room.
Great.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And we only have another minute and 22 seconds. But we're talking about anti-Semitism, and the question is, if you want to chime in briefly, what is your relationship with anti-Semitism as a younger person and in terms of your concerns now? So you could think about that for 10 seconds or so, and I'll just finish my thought, which was, now I go out of my way to say and do things that will not be considered Jewish, typically Jewish.
So you don't foster the negativity.
Exactly. I
Because
don't
yourself-
foster the
yourself-
stereotype.
So you're self-censoring, which means that we accept anti-Semitism because we're not willing to correct it. We're more about protecting ourselves from it because it's so out there. It so exists in the
Yeah.
world.
I'm hoping you'll be able to report on this, Diane.
Me? Myrna, what do you got to say about your relationship to this subject?
To anti-Semitism,
Sure.
it's very scary. And
In your personal life, in your own personal
my
life.
personal life, I really don't remember any particular incidents that were I thought was anti-Semitism. But I lived through the Second World War, and it was just and as a child, and I saw it the way a child would see it, exaggerated and very scary. I'm afraid of it. I'm afraid of what will happen if people vote the wrong way. It bothers me that my grandchildren have all none of the. I don't think I'm going to have any great grandchildren who are Jewish, because they all have. My children married non-Jews, and they have names that are not at all Jewish, and it bothers me. And on the other hand, I said, well, they're going to be safer that way.
Wow. 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 Yeah.
So
Hi,
Well,
Beverly.
I know what happened. Somehow we didn't get assigned. We're in the main room. I don't know what
Hey,
that's.
Bev.
All right, I think I'm going to go ahead and close all the breakout rooms.
Okay, Bobby. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Myrna. Oh, in 60 seconds. All right, so we still have.
Or I'm muting us.
Okay. So the breakout rooms are in process of closing.
Am I still co-host, Bobby? Because I haven't done this in a while. I don't forget how to mute everybody.
I got kicked off
You don't
the,
mute everybody. Don't mute
Okay.
everybody, because
can you
Joanne cannot.
send me back
unmute.
to the
You're in the main room now, Bill.
yeah, can you send me back
To the breakout
to
room.
the breakout? Yes.
It's closing in a few seconds.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, so
And quite frankly, I don't know how, so.
Okay.
Okay, someone has joined us whose phone number ends in 0. Oh, Iris, okay. I thought that was you, but I wasn't sure.
Okay, wow. Thank you, Bobby. Are we all back?
I think so.
Name was Angela.
I see a cohort back
Okay,
here.
so I'm gonna be in the process of muting everybody individually, so. Oh, you continue though.
Oh, okay, so you'll have to unmute when it's your turn to talk then.
Right.
I'm just waiting for that to happen.
No, you can go ahead. I'm doing this in the background.
Okay. So we're now going to gather up not just a repetition of what someone said, but of your sort of overall reflection about what you heard in your breakout room. If anybody would like to share from, I think we had 7 breakout rooms. So people probably don't remember which room you were in, but if you'd like to just share overall reflection, I also took some notes from the group I was in. I'm going to look for hands for someone who would like to start that overall reflective sharing. And I see Jerry Porter, so you can unmute, Jerry.
Okay, so the 2 of us, or 3 of us that did talk, and basically it was a story of where we encountered some anti-Semitism in our life, in school or whatever. The issue that I brought up that people didn't really want to talk about was that it's impossible today to separate politics from anti-Semitism. We have one major party that's dedicated to Christian nationalism and such, and you really can't talk about one without the other. But I was told that Lev says we can't talk about politics. I can't see how we can discuss this topic without talking about politics.
Yeah, I'll just respond to that for a minute. We definitely can talk about politics. Judaism is a very, very political tradition. We cannot endorse a particular candidate. So people have to make their own decisions about which candidate represents white Christian anti-Semitic nationalism and which candidate doesn't. We don't, we're not saying go vote for this person. We're just talking about the issues, which are pretty stark in our state right now. Thank you, Jerry. And I'm going to look for another hand. Enid, you can unmute, Enid.
I'm going to interrupt you for just 1 second. There is someone who came in on a phone whose number ends in 2829. Can you please tell me who you are?
Yes, it's Barbara. I got disconnected.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Go
Uh-huh.
ahead, Enid.
Let's.
Yeah, okay. My turn?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Non-political.
All right. We all talked about our backgrounds, and in one way or another, there was some anti-Semitic incidents that occurred as both early life and our work. My question was, does the situation in Israel, the question about apartheid, relate in any way to the anti-Semitism that is being felt in so many parts of the world, not just in our country? And without getting into our own particular feelings at the moment, I think that might not be a good idea. It was just something I threw out, and something that was at a conference I was there, but not yesterday when the topic was brought up, but I haven't spoken to anyone yet about it, but I'm just curious about it.
Enid, that's a really important question, and I'm making a note of it right here for further discussion. And now I see Stacy. You can unmute.
It's the technique, just write it down.
Thank you. I was going to respond to Enid because that stabbed me in the heart when you brought up the issue, Enid, but I think it's not appropriate for this discussion. But I wanted to say that it was a great discussion, even though short, in our little group. And my way of handling this fear, and it has always been for me, because I think partially that I was never raised in a predominantly Jewish environment. We were always pretty much the only Jews, and my parents would always make a big effort to, come to school and do a Hanukkah party, or make sure that people knew us, and they didn't know us just as some Jews over there. They knew us as people. So whenever I hear something that is anti-Semitic, I have trained myself to fight back with something to the extent of, besides the fact that Jesus was Jewish, Jews are old-fashioned Christians and Christians are newfangled Jews. I try to find the similarities. and there, you know, there are so many, which I think is why there's so many intermarriages, right? You know, Jews and Catholics, or Jews and Italians, or, you know, we tend to have a lot of the same cultural references. And when I get into the fear, it's very bad. In fact, I mentioned that I couldn't get through the book because I know what's happening, and it immediately makes me think that we're the canaries in the coal mine, and it terrifies me. So on a one-on-one daily basis, sure, I've experienced a lot of anti-Semitism, even though I'm blue-eyed blonde and I don't necessarily look Jewish. I think I'm attuned to it. So anyway, that's my contribution. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Stacy. I'm going to look for a couple more hands here. And I see Diane.
Hi all. Yeah, I think there was a commonality of a theme. We've been exposed to it in our youth, but one thing I will say is what came up for a couple of us was how we find ourselves self-centering, as if to stem and stave off the anticipated anti-Semitic response. We ourselves then do the overcorrection and hide ourselves in some ways. That's one takeaway.
That's a really important observation. Okay, danger of self-centered. I'm just taking notes here. Okay, one last person
We
here.
actually had Fran had her hand up and Carol Vortheimer.
And Paul does too. Okay, three short last reflections here. Fran?
Yeah, I was with Stacy in our group, and there was the common theme of hiding and fear, and not being able to share. And you know, growing up, there was that fear element, and that it shaped how as adults to hide. That's it.
Okay, I think next, who was after Fran? I know Paul's third in line here. Who was the, oh, who's
Carol
the,
Vortheimer.
Carol Vortheimer.
In our group, we became aware of current anti-Semitism, not just in the news, not just political, but I personally have heard many anti-Semitic remarks from Jews about other Jews, specifically Orthodox Jews. And as the mother of an Orthodox family, I find that very painful. And that has not been my experience, and it's very painful.
Thank you, Carol. And Susan, you'll be our last person for this round. Okay, Susan Thompson.
I think can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think in our group, there was a commonality about overt versus covert anti-Semitism. Overt in that we maybe couldn't get a job or apply for a job. We were scorned, etc. But sometimes in white suburban areas where we went to school and so on, they didn't speak the stereotypes, but we weren't in clubs, etc. And it was there. And occasionally, like if you had to negotiate something, you'd hear things like, oh, you're going to Jew them down. You know, it just would come out. And so I think that there's both the overt and covert, but I think even if we came from, like you said, in your family, a non-practicing Jewish family, as it got to be more overt in the news and politics, I think most of us rose to the occasion to do things about it and become activists. And the other thing that I brought up was sometimes a lack of understanding between Blacks and Jews about the commonality of the prejudice, but it doesn't seem sometimes to bring us closer, even though we might both have a history of prejudice.
Wow. Okay. Thank you, Susan. I'm going to also share some reflections just from what everyone else has shared and also from the breakout room, which is I'm hearing from many people a general sense of Jews not feeling safe or maybe feeling safer with other Jews. And Diane's very nuanced question about that, is there an overcorrection in the Jewish community to compensate for the true dangers that Jews have experienced? The question about feeling safe is huge. From the breakout room I was in, I found it moving when one person spoke about, you know, understanding marginalization in other ways, such as about being a gay person, can open you up to understanding other kinds of marginalization. Like our hearts understand other people's pain, even if it's not necessarily yours, if you've ever experienced being targeted for something. One person made a very interesting comment that I think might resonate also, of feeling safer when you do have a foot in the Christian world, which again is connected to safety and fear, like feeling safer when you are, you know, you have the people in power sort of connected to you. And also of liking the perspective of the outsider, like there being some kind of joy and empowerment from not being part of the dominant mainstream, so that these things are complicated, you know, it's not all or nothing. And then the final thing, or two final things, I guess, that I was noticing are just a lot of the variations in just geography. Were you in New York or were you in the Midwest at different stages of life? Huge lot of diversity within Jewish experience of what we've faced. And then finally, somebody mentioning in the breakout room, feeling more or less vulnerable at different stages of life. And now as an aging elder, noticing feeling more vulnerable. And again, that's back to the issue of safety, fear, which is deeply ingrained in the collective Jewish psyche from everything we've been through over the generations. We come by that fear about safety really honestly. And if I was going to name one legacy that has impacted the Jewish community generation after generation, it's that inherited sense of the world is not safe for us. And so many people here spoke to that. So we're seeing in living action the impact of generations of anti-Semitism, that question of, is the world safe for us? Am I safe? Am I evaluating it right? Huge. And that's the impact of thousands of years, basically, of what we now would call anti-Semitism, but of being targeted. So we're going to shift now a little bit, because I promised in this first class we would talk a little bit about why and when anti-Semitism arises. So this is basically a teaching that's so relevant historically and so relevant today. And I'm going to ask you, how would you apply this analysis to what's happening today, even in this state? So historically, you can picture the power system like this. There's the rulers up at the very top, who in Europe were the kings and queens, mostly the kings, and the nobility. And in this country are the sort of 1% of corporation owners who have never been Jewish.
Thank you.
Like as a group.
Rabbis every
Can we mute everybody here?
I did.
Joan needs to be muted.
I did.
Thank you. Okay, so we're looking at a three-tiered power structure here. At the very top in both Europe and the United States, the Jews as a group were never at the very top. We were not the kings, queens, nobility. That's not who the Jews were. And in this country, we almost to a percent are not part of the 1% corporation owners. We're not the Bill Gates and the, what's the Apple guy's name who founded Apple? Apple.
Oh, Apple.
Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs. We're not Bill Gates. We're not Okay, what's another big one there?
Jeff Bezos.
Jeff Bezos.
Okay, if you look at the biggest multi-billionaires, it's not Jews. Now, who the Jews have been okay, let's mute everybody unless it's your turn to talk, please.
George Soros.
Okay, but he's a big philanthropist, but he is not really the running the world. I hate to tell you. George Soros is a good philanthropist and he is way high up there, but go look at the Forbes 500. Okay, it's not the Jews running the world, even though we get that kind of reputation. That's not what's true. If you actually look statistically at who owns the news media, Robert Murdoch and Jeff Bezos, and if you look at who owns the news, if you look at who owns the corporations, if you look at who the presidents have been, who the senators have been, it's not the Jews. So the power structure at the very top in Europe and in the United States has never been the Jews. That's not what's true, even though there's myths about it. It has not been the Jews. The second rung in societies in both Europe and in the United States, because this is kind of anti-Semitism Western focused at the moment. The Jews have been very, very successful in societies, in small artisanry, professions, business, trading, merchantry, the arts like TV, movies, Hollywood. The Jews have been enormously successful as the second rung of what creates a society. Not the top, but yes, that second rung. So in Europe, Jews did basically invent capitalism. Now, this was because in Christian theology, you weren't allowed to lend money. Usury was forbidden. Yet the kings and princes and nobility of Europe needed to borrow money because they wanted to build armies and go on expeditions. And so they were very happy to have somebody who was going to lend them money. And the Jews were really well situated to do this, because we were forbidden from owning land, and it was an agricultural society, but we couldn't be farmers. So instead, we were small merchants and tradespeople, and we had trade routes that in an expanding world of transportation and communication began to be quite lucrative. So we did found big banks that could lend money, like the Rothschilds, and the Jews did become money lenders to the kings and queens. Well, I shouldn't say queens. I'm not meaning to say queens. The kings and princes and nobility of the land. So the Jews were that secondary tier. We invented capitalism. We were of great use to the rulers of the land. So now we've talked about the top tier was not Jewish. The middle tier was very innovative and kind of cutting edge Jewish in large part. And the bottom tier in Europe and in this American history was basically peasantry in Europe in those hundreds of years, and what you would call laborers, the working class, and slaves basically in this country for those same hundreds of years. The bottom class was mostly, there were immigrant Jews who were very poor, but were able to work our way up. So that bottom class was peasants who were basically Christian in Europe, because Jews weren't allowed to own land. And in this country, the workers, the workers of the land. So historically, what would happen is that when the ruling class was threatened, it could divert attention to that middle group and say, no, it's not our fault that we're extracting huge amounts of wealth from you and living high and fancy. It's the Jews' fault. Target the Jews. The Jews were situated in the middle, where we were a very easy scapegoat. Very, very easy scapegoat. And if you think about it, at times of turmoil and distress, that's when the pogroms would happen, like when there was an uprising of the peasants, for instance, in Europe. The ruling class would say, no, we're not the problem. It's the Jews. Go expel them from your town, your village, your city. Get rid of the Jews. And we know where that led in Europe. Deep entrenched use of the Jews as friends in good times and as targets in difficult times, as scapegoats, literally scapegoats. Now, in Europe, this was deeply entwined with theological anti-Semitism. I mean, the idea that Jews killed Jesus. In most times, in most places in Europe, the Catholic Church ran the show. And the Catholic Church had a lot of reasons to be very threatened by Judaism, which had been the foundation of Christianity. Jesus was a Jewish rabbi. So the Catholic Church did not like the Jews and specifically taught horrible, terrible, and what we would now call anti-Semitic, I mean, but targeting the Jews for killing Jesus. And so a lot of, the church was really kind of promoting this anti-Jewish teaching that was theological, but it also led to very material consequences that were very, very negative for Jewish communities. So you have in Europe, you had the political and theological intertwining that made it very possible to target that middle class, that precarious class of Jews who weren't really the power brokers, but also weren't at the bottom of the society. So the Jews had privilege. And if you study history in Europe and in this country, that Jews were worried and insecure as a group about losing that precarious middle status. And so Jews many times cozied up to the powers that were, which happens in this country too, and became more hated and more of a target of the bottom classes when there were uprisings, because the Jews did curry favor with the powers that be, because the Jews as a community were insecure. They don't want to be expelled, targeted, plundered, as happened many times. So the Jews were precarious, insecure, cozied up to the ruling powers, but weren't the ruling class actually, and were easily targeted and scapegoated. And this scapegoating happened particularly at times of mass insecurity, lots of unknowns, lots of cultural and technological change. Now I want to leap to the United States today and to say the same power structure is true here. It's a different power structure than what affects Blacks in this country. Some of whom are Jewish also, there's an overlap, but most of them are not Jewish in this country. Whereas Blacks have always been at the bottom in this country as a class, as a group. There's been the elite, there's been Jews in the middle, like Hollywood, professions, lots of success and accrual of wealth, but never the real power in the land. And Blacks have always been as a group at the bottom. This country already had its scapegoat. And the Jews were in the middle and did cozy up to power because of that precariousness, wanting to be safe. In the last decades, we have faced an enormously shifting landscape, like tectonic plates moving underneath our civilization. A lot of it's had to do with globalization, where work went overseas to where there was cheaper labor, cheaper workforce, and factories left the heartland of the United States. And we all know this story, right? And that's why the white rural and Midwestern Rust Belt working class feels pretty undermined because their jobs have left. And those jobs have actually gone overseas. The Jews didn't do it. But this is a time of great uncertainty. And you see the suffering right now happening in our own heartland, in the white, especially male community, where there's lots of opioid addiction, lots of suicide. I mean, it's a mess. It's horrible. And those are the times that anti-Semitic tropes rise up, going back for hundreds of years. It's when people aren't getting what they need at the bottom that becomes, Jews become the easy target, rather than really reorganize an economy so that everybody does get a livelihood and investment in health and education and all the things people need to thrive. Instead of really looking at what the issues are, it's easier to say, oh, well, the Jews are pulling the strings, they're running the show, it's their fault, which we're seeing right now in this country. Very tried and true marginalization and targeting of a scapegoat community. Same thing. We've seen it before historically, again and again and again. And many of you are familiar with the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was a early 20th century document coming out of Russia that said the Jews are running the world, the Jews are pulling the strings. And that has resurfaced in our modern day today. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion that are basically saying. Okay, so I wanted to give a big framework of sort of when and why anti-Semitism arises in for very specific reasons there. And I also want to say, added to that mix today, we have the conflation of a different issue, which Enid touched on. And that is to say that for 2,000 years, Jews did not have any political power because we were not the bosses of our own land. We didn't have an army. We didn't have any power. We were subject people across Europe and even in this country. We were not, we didn't have a state and we weren't politically powerful. With the founding of the state of Israel, all of a sudden, Jews somewhere in the world, i.e. in Israel, did have a government and could make the same mistakes that other governments make, which is to do bad things. And right now, the conflation of anti-Jewish feeling with criticisms of the government of Israel gets tangled together. It's always okay to criticize a government. Governments make mistakes. It's good to have criticism of a government policy. That's the criticism of the government of Israel, which makes bad decisions about occupation and disrespect and dehumanization of Palestinians and unequal sharing of resources. But that gets mixed up with, so the Jews are evil. And that's anti-Semitism. It's not even anti-Semitic to say there shouldn't be a Jewish state of Israel. An anti-Zionist position is not necessarily anti-Jewish. That has to do with, should there be a state on that piece of land, or should there be a different way of having a safe home for all people? But those things get tangled up right now. And a lot of people, especially I have noticed in the Muslim world, are anti-Jewish when what they really mean is we don't agree with the Israeli government's policies, and we might not even agree there should be a state there. But they mix that up with being anti-Jewish. So that's an added problem today, in addition to all the globalization and shifting economic change that's happening under everybody's feet, which is a time Jews are likely to be targeted. So that's a lot. I want to make a space for questions, discussion here. I'm going to ask people to speak briefly so we have enough turns for people who want to say something here.
And I just want to say, if you're calling in on a phone, you can unmute and ask your questions by hitting *6.
I'm looking for hands here. And I see Pauline, I think it is there. You can unmute. Do I have your name right there?
I'm actually Rose, but I'm
okay.
there at the moment.
Okay, good.
So I don't want to, take us down a road that sort of isn't really exactly on point, but I just want to add to something that you said about criticism of Israel and whether it's inherently anti-Semitic.
Mm-hmm.
And what I want to say is, I think one piece of it that you left out when you say it's always okay to criticize a government, and it is always okay to criticize a government. However, could you stop? However, in my world, when Israel's government is the only government you're criticizing, I don't mean you, Rabbi, obviously. I mean the one that the person is criticizing, and the person isn't criticizing China for what they do to the Uyghurs, and the organization isn't sending missions to X country for what they do to their minorities. That is, in my world, anti-Semitism. When you single Israel's government out and ignore what other governments do, to me, that's anti-Semitic.
Thank you, Rose. I'm looking for hands and
And
Carol.
Jerry, I think Jerry wants to speak.
Okay, I'm going to first look for people who haven't spoken. Carol Kaplan, was your hand up there? You're on mute, so I can't hear you, but I'm not sure you wanted to speak.
I just unmuted myself. It's Shirley. So.
Okay, Shirley, your turn.
So I think a distinction between Jewish populations and all the others is the fact it's dormant. Anti-Semitism never goes away. It's there. It's brewing on a low flame. And it doesn't take much to raise that flame as it is now being raised. For anyone who didn't hear it, the Anti-Defamation League has reported that for the first time, anti-Semitism hate has increased by 2 digits within, I believe they said, the past year. But the fact that it is dormant, and so that one has to be, in a sense, hypervigilant, always there.
Thank you, Shirley. Carol? Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to totally agree with the other speaker that I find that the anti-Israel, especially in the progressive in college campuses, this anti-Israel sentiment is really, I feel, as a veiled anti-Semitic, as the other, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Nobody in it talks about the injustices of, and the Saudi Arabia, of all the Arab countries and their human rights abuses, the human rights abuses that go on all over the world. Not to say that the treatment of the Palestinians is something that needs to be addressed. And I have personally supported organizations that do address that. But I feel that the ignoring of the injustices of other countries while focusing on the Palestinian issue in Israel is just veiled anti-Semitism.
Thank you, Carol. I think we have time for one more comment now, but I also want to really encourage people to find a buddy for further talking. And even right now, if you're able to do a direct message in the Zoom chat box to connect with someone, exchange contact information so that you can find a time to keep this conversation going. There's lots to be said. So our last comment is going to be Maria. Then we're going to have a couple announcements, and we're going to close with our Kaddish to Rabbanan for learning. Maria.
I just think of the hypocrisy of people who come out and say anti-Semitic things or are anti-Semitic. You think of Uncle with Christianity, or I was raised in a Catholic school. Everything is based on Judaism, on the Old Testament. Those, it's like, why? I feel like saying to those people who are like that, why are you going after your own roots, for God's sake? You built your religion, oh, the symbol was there, and it's like you're chopping away at the roots of your own house. But sadly, I don't say anything. Well, I might, depending on who the other person is. And then remember, people saying, they would come out and say anti-Semitic, this and that, but I'd rather have a Jewish doctor. I'd rather have a Jewish lawyer. So I don't know what to say.
It's-
Thank you, Maria. I'm going to stop you there, but thank you very much for contributing that just because we're almost out of time. A quick announcement here, which is to say that in our state, we have a very big election coming up. I mean, all over, we have a big election coming up, but in this particular state, the choice between white Christian nationalist anti-Semitic candidates and candidates who are working for the common good is very stark. And if you would like to join a phone bank to activate voters, you can even join the phone bank from out of state on October 25th in the evening. People who are local will be gathering at the power office at 6 o'clock for dinner. And then the phone bank starts at 6:30. You have to bring your own device. So you will need your laptop, your charger, your phone, your charger. You will need all your equipment, but you will be given a training and a script. I will be there. I'd love to be there with local people, and anybody can join just the phone bank, which is at 6:30 from anywhere in the country, 6:30 East Coast time to phone bank. And we're going to be reaching voters all across the state of Pennsylvania about the election coming up. And really just connecting with people. We're only calling people who are likely to vote against white Christian nationalism, although it is not telling people who to vote for. It's not like a partisan thing, but who we're calling is people who are likely to vote against white Christian nationalism, and for the common good. So everybody's welcome to join me in that way. And we're going to sing our.
How do we do that, Julie? How do I join you?
Okay, really good question. You can email me directly and I will connect you with the link for it. Because I don't.
Thank you.
Unless, Bobby, if you happen to have the link for that right, your fingertips don't.
No, but you could probably find it on Power Interfaith.
Well,
org.
Oh, that's a good point. Actually, if you go to the Power website, there's a Democracy Hub and you just choose the date, October 25th. I will put that email in the chat box right now.
okay.
Power.
I wish I could still vote in Pennsylvania.
We wish you could do that.
Power Interfaith. Choose. Okay, go to Democracy Hub right there.
Is that an email you're sending?
I'm putting
No,
it in the chat box right now. I can put it on I'll put it on the listserv too. Will that help people?
Please.
So it's 6 o'clock in person.
6 or 6:30?
Office, well, for you, or virtually at 6:30.
Okay.
Okay, so 6 o'clock is for dinner and being together at the Power office, 6 o'clock prompt. And all of this is on that website that I just put in the chat box. And later today, I can put it onto the listserv as well. Or Bobby, can you put it on the listserv?
Sure.
That would just be really helpful. Okay, so for our teachers and our students and the students of our students, we ask for peace and loving kindness, and let us say amen. We ask for peace and loving kindness, and let us say amen. We ask for peace and loving kindness, and let us say amen. Chaverim, love to all. I'm on my way off to do a wedding at the waterworks now, and it's always a joy to be here together. I'm really glad we've launched into this important topic, and I will see all of you sooner than our next class, but also for our next class on, I believe, November 20th. Love to all. Bye-bye.